You know, we all absolutely love a good story. And there is perhaps no story we love more than the classic tale of the self-made genius. You know the one, the lone hero who battles overwhelming odds, starts from absolute scratch, and rises to the very top through sheer grit and undeniable raw talent. It's a beautiful, inspiring myth. But in this explainer, we're going to kick off an investigation into this universally accepted narrative. We are going to unravel what truly drives extraordinary achievement, and I promise you, it is not what you might think.
Using Malcolm Gladwell's absolutely groundbreaking research as our guide, we're going to systematically dismantle this idea that the most successful people rise to the top entirely on their own. We're going to pull back the curtain and expose the hidden mechanics of success. But to do that, we have to completely change the lens through which we view the people who stand at the very top of the world.
Think about this brilliantly simple analogy for a second. When biologists look at an organism, they don't just look at the organism itself. They look at its entire ecosystem. There's a saying, the tallest oak in the forest is the tallest, not just because it grew from the hardiest acorn. I mean, sure, it was a good acorn, but that tallest oak simply had the best sunlight, the soil around it happened to be unusually rich, no rabbits came by and chewed its bark when it was a vulnerable sapling, and it had the incredible sheer luck of avoiding the lumberjacks. We are so conditioned to always focus on the acorn. We celebrate the acorn. But today, we're going to shift our gaze. We are going to look at the sunlight, the soil, and the very lucky forest.
Our detective story actually starts with a bizarre medical mystery back in the 1950s. Picture a little place called Roseto, Pennsylvania. It was a tight-knit town made up of Italian immigrants, and medical researchers stumbled upon something there that was absolutely baffling. They asked a simple question. Why did literally nobody in this town under the age of 55 have heart disease? You have to remember, at this time, heart attacks were a massive, terrifying epidemic across the United States. Yet here was an entire town inexplicably dying of old age, and really nothing else.
Now, what's truly fascinating is what those researchers initially suspected and just how completely wrong they ended up being. You'd probably think, oh, they must have had a super healthy diet, right? Actually, scratch that. They cooked with heavy lard and ate really thick, high-fat foods. They smoked, they didn't exercise. Okay, so maybe it was genetics or a magically healthy geographical location? Nope, because when researchers went out and tracked down relatives of these exact same townspeople who had moved to neighboring cities, those relatives were suffering from heart disease at the exact same rates as every other American.
The researchers were just literally scratching their heads. They were completely baffled until they zoomed out and looked at the town itself. The answer was the community. The secret to their incredible, almost superhuman health was their powerful, protective, incredibly tight-knit social structure. We're talking 3 generations living under one single roof, people constantly stopping to chat with neighbors on the street. They had inadvertently created a little village that completely insulated them from the deadly, isolating pressures of the modern world. So what does this all mean for us? Well, it means you cannot understand someone's health, or, as we're about to see, their incredible success, by looking at them in complete isolation. You simply cannot understand the tree without looking at the entire forest around it. The people you surround yourself with, the culture you are born into, they shape you in profound, life-altering ways. All right, let's move on to our next clue and watch how this idea really starts to build. Take a close look at the roster for an elite Canadian junior hockey team. Scan the birth dates of these top-tier players. What jumps out at you? They're almost entirely born in January, February, and March. And here's the crazy part. This isn't just a weird coincidence on one single team. This bizarre clustering of early birthdays happens across the absolute highest levels of Canadian hockey, year after year after year.
Now you might be wondering, why on earth is this important? It all comes down to a simple, arbitrary rule. Canadian youth hockey has an eligibility cutoff date of January 1st. Think about what that actually means. If you are a kid born on January 2nd, you are playing alongside kids born in December of that exact same year. Picture that for a second. When you're 9 or 10 years old, a 12-month age gap isn't just a minor detail. It translates to a massive difference in physical maturity, in coordination, and in raw speed. In this system, being born in January is the exact equivalent of being planted in the absolute richest soil.
And here is exactly how that tiny little seed of an advantage grows. Step 1. The slightly older, bigger kids are naturally viewed by coaches as more talented. Step 2. Because they seem more talented, they get more ice time, they receive better coaching, and they get more attention. Step 3. Thanks to that extra practice, they actually do become better, and they're selected for the elite teams. By step 4, what started as a tiny, completely arbitrary age advantage has snowballed over the years into a tremendous, insurmountable divide. Sociologists actually call this the Matthew effect. It's this phenomenon where those who are given a tiny, sometimes random initial advantage end up accumulating massive, life-altering rewards over time.
Which naturally brings us to the next crucial piece of the puzzle, time, specifically the number 10,000. Researchers studying true, world-class experts, we're talking everyone from classical piano prodigies to chess grandmasters, have found that this is the magic number. 10,000 hours of deliberate, focused practice is what's required to achieve true mastery in almost anything. No one, no matter how gifted, just floats to the top effortlessly. But here is the massive catch. 10,000 hours is an enormous amount of time. You literally cannot get there alone. You need an incredible sequence of opportunities, support, and resources to even have the chance to get those hours in.
Just look at Bill Gates. Yes, absolutely, the man undeniably had a brilliant mind, but far more importantly, he was handed an incredibly rare sequence of lucky opportunities. Back in 1968, as an 8th grader, he got practically unlimited access to a time-sharing computer terminal. To put that in perspective, almost no adult in the world, let alone a middle schooler, had access to that kind of technology at the time. By 1971, he was spending 8 hours a day programming. So, when he confidently dropped out of Harvard in 1975, he didn't just have potential, he was already an absolute expert. He didn't just earn his 10,000 hours, he was gifted a massive, incredibly lucky head start. So, the core realization here is this: talent is innate. It's built in. But opportunity is a gift. The Beatles are another perfect example. They were undeniably talented, for sure, but what truly separated them from every other high school rock band was the sunlight of extraordinary luck. They got invited to play in Hamburg, Germany, but it wasn't glamorous. They were literally forced to play live on stage for 8 hours a night, 7 days a week. It was an exhausting, brutal crucible, but it forced them to hit their 10,000 hours way before anyone else, transforming them from an okay band into a global phenomenon. But what happens when a genuine, bona fide genius completely lacks that sunlight? I want you to pivot your attention to a man named Chris Langan. Chris has an IQ of 195. Now, to give you some perspective on that, Albert Einstein's IQ is estimated to be around 150. Langan was literally reading complex theoretical physics at age 16, yet he ended up working for most of his life as a farmhand and a bar bouncer. He never became a famous scientist, he never became a billionaire. So what went wrong? Why didn't his acorn grow? The devastating difference lies entirely in their environments. Chris Langan grew up in deep, crushing poverty, with a family that simply did not know how to support or nurture his incredible intellect. At one point, he lost a full college scholarship simply because his mother didn't know how to fill out a financial aid form and missed the deadline. Now compare him to J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant physicist who famously led the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer also had a genius-level IQ, but he was raised by wealthy, highly educated parents who deliberately taught him how to confidently navigate authority. High analytical intelligence, raw brainpower, is actually completely useless without the proper cultural legacy and support system to help it thrive in the real world. Psychologists actually have a specific term for this. They call it practical intelligence. It's essentially knowing what to say, knowing exactly who to say it to, when to say it, and how to say it for maximum effect. This critical, world-navigating skill is a cultural advantage. It is painstakingly taught by involved, often affluent parents, and it gives successful people the practical tools to shape the world to their desires. It teaches them to negotiate, to advocate for themselves, and to look authority figures right in the eye. Chris Langan lacked this entirely. Oppenheimer had it in spades. And this brilliantly illustrates how the cultural legacies we inherit shape our fundamental relationship with work itself. In the early 20th century, Jewish immigrants arriving in New York predominantly found work in the garment industry. Make no mistake, it was exhausting, brutal labor. But crucially, it was meaningful. It had complexity, the workers had a degree of autonomy, and there was a direct, visible connection between how hard they worked and the reward they received. They passed down this fierce, resilient work ethic, which perfectly primed their children and grandchildren to become New York's top lawyers, doctors, and professionals. The legacy of meaningful work echoes across generations. Which brings us to one final deeply persistent mystery. Why do Asian students historically seem to excel at mathematics? We so often jump to the conclusion that it's just innate brain power, or some mysterious natural genetic gift for numbers. But as you might have guessed by now, the persistent stereotype of math excellence actually has absolutely nothing to do with innate brain power. Believe it or not, the answer actually lies deep in the mud of a rice paddy. There's an old proverb: no one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich. Cultivating rice is extraordinarily demanding. It is exact, complex, and requires a staggering amount of dogged persistence. Over centuries, this embedded a deeply rooted cultural belief that hard work, patience, and persistence are the absolute keys to solving literally any problem. That exact historical attitude, passed down through generations, is precisely what gives a student the patience to sit and struggle with a complex math equation for 20 minutes, instead of throwing their hands up and giving up after 30 seconds. So as we pull all these separate threads together, one undeniable, absolute truth emerges. The self-made man is a complete myth. The people who stand before kings, the billionaires, the virtuosos, they may look like they did it all by themselves, standing alone on a mountaintop, but they didn't. Success is never a solitary journey. It is always, without exception, the product of history, of community, of hidden advantages, cultural legacies, and extraordinary, lucky timing.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. We have spent so much time as a society celebrating those towering, magnificent oaks, attributing all of their glory and height entirely to their mighty acorns. But what if we completely shifted our focus? What if we actually work to provide the right sunlight and the richest soil for everyone? Imagine how infinitely richer, more innovative, and more incredible our world would be if we stopped relying on arbitrary cutoff dates and lucky breaks, and instead actively built a society that intentionally nurtures every single acorn.